Welcome to the Endocrine Matters podcast. This podcast episode is sponsored by Complete Medicine and Hey Healthy. Welcome back to Endocrine Matters. I'm Dr. Arti Thangudu, endocrinologist, mother of two, and someone who has spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to be fully present in medicine, in motherhood, and in my own life without feeling like I'm constantly shortchanging one of them. Today's guest put words to something I didn't have the language for. Neha Ruch is the founder of the Power Pause, the leading platform for ambitious women navigating the intersection of family life and career, and the USA Today bestselling author of the book by the same name. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Time, Fortune, and one of Oprah Daly's best self-help books of 2025. I read The Power Pause and kept thinking, I wish I'd had this. Not because I paused, I actually pivoted. I left a system that was making it impossible to be the doctor I wanted to be, the mother I wanted to be, and honestly, the person I wanted to be, and built something outside of it. But the questions Neha is asking are the same ones I was wrestling with in that moment, and the same ones I hear from my patients every day. How do I hold all of who I am? How do I stop choosing between the things I love the most? Neha, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Hi, Neha. I'm so excited to have you on your podcast. I read your whole book, and it was just one of those books that I was like, man, I wish I had it 6 years ago. So before we get started, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience in case they haven't heard of you or heard of your book?
Of course. So first of all, it's so nice to finally get to see each other in this way. I've shared this before, Arti, that I think the medical community specifically needs to see more models of women being able to be intentional about how they spend their time and their energy. So you're such a great example of that. I am Neha Ruch. I live in Manhattan with my two children, Bodhi and Lila, who are your kids' ages 10 and 8. I have a dog named Coconut. And I run a platform called the Power Pause. Some people who might have been following early might know it as Mother Untitled, which is how it started 10 years ago in 2017. I started this work to really reshape the narrative of ambitious women who were choosing to pause or shift their career for family life. I, came face to face myself with really outdated perceptions of that. I just graduated Stanford Business School. I had clocked in 10 years in marketing. I was running a brand at a tech startup. I had my first kid and I wanted more time with him. And I initially downshifted to part-time work, would eventually pause, but immediately started hearing are you giving up? Are you going to be bored all day? Why do you even bother with grad school? And it just really spoke to this tension around how we think of ambitious women and how we think of career breaks or career shifts for family. And so I started my work as a representation of the new cohort of women who are trying to be intentional about our time and really make decisions that work for us for the long game of work and family.
And I'm so grateful that you have done that and kind of normalized this idea. And, I think especially like in our culture, we are told to like work, achieve. And then it's like, okay, where's the husband and where are the kids, And then you're like, wait, what was I supposed to be doing this whole time? And then there's also nothing that can prepare you for like the immense responsibility and love that comes when you hold that baby in your arms too. And it makes you feel like, gosh, what do I do now? And I think, we spoke about this briefly, but I feel like all of this hard work for our careers, it should make us have more options and opportunities. It shouldn't close us in and make us not able to do more things. And I think we kind of get on this hamster wheel or this career escalator, whatever you want to call it, of like, okay, get to the next level. And it can make us kind of miss the forest for the trees,
Right.
So there's this scene in your book, and it's close to the beginning, where you are like sitting with another mom friend with your babies, and she asks you, "So what do you do?" And you talked about like how that was such a loaded question, and you kind of drew a blank and you didn't know exactly how to answer. Can you talk to us about like why that question feels so loaded and what it might reveal about how we've tied our identity to our careers?
Oh, I chose to start the book with that scene because I think we've all felt it at some point, right? And we all know that feeling of not being able to articulate what we do or what we care about with confidence. And I think what do you do in this culture is this universal conversation starter, but it's unfortunately come to stand in for like, who are you? And so if for years in my case, I had been saying, I run brand at a tech startup, right? And in so few words, I was able to say, I'm in a leadership position, brand, so somewhat creative, tech startup. So I'm like a little bit ahead of the curve in the tech world. And there was something about that easy way to convey attributes that felt so easy. And then when I chose, like you did, and like so many women are, to make a bold shift away from the traditional workforce, then suddenly I was challenged to find a way to convey all those things about myself that I cared about without a pithy title. And for reasons I get into in the book, The Power Pause, I really think the phrase stay-at-home mom is just so loaded in this culture, right? We commissioned a survey called the American Mothers on Pause survey, truly to pull back the reality of modern women on pauses or shifts. And we polled 1,000 members of the general population, 1,200 at-home parents, asked them, what do you think of as a stay-at-home mom? They will still say June Cleaver, which is the fictional character from the 1950s. If you ask what they think of as a working mom, they will say Sheryl Sandberg, Beyonce, and who's Michelle Obama. So that is like a power chasm that is just far too flawed. But in that moment, you can imagine why stay-at-home mom then wasn't like at the tip of my tongue. So yes, I word vomited. I think I said a million things like, I used to do this and I'm doing this for right now and we'll see. And all in all, like didn't really think at all about what I really wanted to convey. And so the first thing I would say is if you're going through a transition period, you should assume it's going to be tricky, and that's normal. And it takes practice. And so the script I offered to myself then and offered in the book is right now, because it's for a moment in time. And if you learn anything in parenthood, it's that it changes over and over and over again, including your work-life blend. So right now, I get to, because it actually is a really empowering choice to want to spend time with family, if it is a choice. So right now, I get to be with my kids or spend time with my kids. That's what I was actually doing. That's what I cared about. And then I added, and I'm exploring this project about work and family, and I'm renovating a house right now. Basically adding something else that is exciting you because it allows you to then form a sense of self outside of what you do for work.
Yeah, and I feel like you get into this situation where you almost feel like you're like, well, I'm staying at home with my kids, but like,
Mhm.
but I also used to do this, and it's like almost this decision where you're trying to justify what you're now choosing to do, which it doesn't need to be justified too. So I love that like you created and shared language around what you could say to make you, because sometimes it's like nobody else cares. Nobody else is judging you. Nobody else like really cares. But for us as professional women, it's like, we're the ones that are like nervous about saying that we're not working,
Mhm.
in a typical career job. So that's so helpful. And you've really pushed back on that idea that taking a career pause and even just calling it a career pause is that takes away from your ambition. And I love that because I feel like, I was an endocrinologist working in a very busy private practice when I decided to pivot. And, I was seeing 35 patients a day just on this hamster wheel. My son was a newborn and he was struggling on his growth curve. So I really needed to make a change. But, I trained so long to become a doctor. And so I didn't want to give it up, but I knew this wasn't sustainable for my family. And I felt like when I paused, my brain started working.
Mm.
I felt like I figured out how to pay off my husband's student loans. I figured out all these things that gave us so much freedom. But if I had stayed on that hamster wheel, perhaps I probably would never have figured those things out. And I never would have been able to do both with such joy and gratitude that I do now. Tell us a little bit more about redefining ambition for women who are now mothers, but had a career or are very creative or ambitious in their own way.
I love your example because I think so many people would share that sentiment that you're going through the motions for so long that if you don't stop and think, a lot of important things just don't ever get thought about or turned over. And I think one of the blessings of taking a beat, whether it's a month, 3 months, 3 years, however long that period is you can turn over some of the stuff that really matters, right? And we have been taught, especially our generation, that ambition comes in one particular form and it's tied to a ladder, and that ladder goes in one direction. And I think we think that if we step off of that ladder, it then naturally sets us back to the beginning. And obviously, what that has done is it's broken our sense of confidence that if we shift, we are still ambitious human beings. By definition, ambition in Merriam-Webster's dictionary will say the determination to do. That's it. That's all it says. And I would add the determination to do things you care about, right? And then I would add that you care about them, you value them, and you're taking the time to align your time with your values. And then you're trusting that you're going to come back and recalibrate it over and over again. It's that intentionality that you and I connect on, right? And so by that definition, I think ambition has to be held more broadly. It is because we're going to do a great many things over the long game of life, right? Yes, absolutely. We're going to do work, and that work will come in many forms. We will care for our children. We will care for our partners. We will care for our parents. We will build communities. We will make change, hopefully, in different ways. And so that it is very natural to have to recalibrate the way that we're spending time. And I think the fact that we were under the assumption that our energy could just go in one place for the long game of life was just such a flawed ideology. And so we are in this sort of messy middle of having to rethink that, right? And I think a lot of the work that we're doing is really making sure that people understand that a career pause is not a career ender, and that actually there are strategic ways in which, first of all, you can preserve and recognize and celebrate all the work that you may have done up until that point, because it doesn't disappear. It doesn't evaporate. And then how in sort of small ways you can start to think about ways in which you might grow or add to that experience non-traditional ways of expanding your sense of self or your network or your interests, right? And that's really the power of this time, is you do get to expand a new layer of yourself. You're not losing yourself. You're bringing everything you really loved about your work, and you're layering on top of it a new set of non-traditional ideas and perspectives. And that actually can make you so much more rich and powerful and interesting as you consider your next chapter.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And, in your book, you sort of lay out this foundation for a woman who might be interested in taking a career pause when she has children, but who needs some help setting herself up, And I think when I was shifting, we did a lot of those things naturally, like budgeting and planning and figuring out how to manage without that second income. Also, like how I was going to stay connected with my profession. Of course, I didn't really pause for very long. I more pivoted, but I was going into something solo, so I felt a lot of overlaps. So would you talk a little bit about that? Like, how do you see a woman powerfully and intentionally setting herself up for a power pause so she doesn't lose touch with that professional identity that she's taken so long to grow?
Yeah. So I want to touch on the first piece, which was the financial preparation, because whether or not this is a financial no-brainer for your family, right? So oftentimes what I'll hear women say is like, actually, based on my income and the cost of childcare, it was like a net. Even if it is that way, or you have the financial privilege for you didn't need a two-income household regardless. Whatever that case may be, it is so important to plan together, because the financial dignity that is achieved when you lay out all of your family finances, right? We have a ritual. We do it at the beginning of the year. We use essentially like a P&L from a company, but we apply it to our family, which I think is incredibly important, that we treat our organization, our home, as an organization. And we are the two co-founders, right? And so as we were preparing, like I mentioned, I initially went part-time and then I eventually paused, which, by the way, I do think is an excellent strategy to sort of test how you're doing financially or how you're doing emotionally too. Like, you might want to stay connected to work in that format if that's available to you. Anyways, we basically had this P&L. We had the income, which is both of our salaries, and then we sort of tinkered with, well, what would the model look like if that salary got halved or that salary got eliminated for a period of time. And then we lay out every single budget category, from like a mortgage all the way down to dining out or kids' doctors or kids' clothing. And it's all in a spreadsheet. And then it becomes about moving money around, right? So you're looking at this spreadsheet and you're thinking, all right, if we're changing the income, how are we going to accommodate together? What might we have to shift to make room for that shift? Or, by the way, maybe it's not such a shift because our childcare expenses are reducing, and it allows a forum in which you and your partner together are having a conversation where you are essentially agreeing that you are both still partners in this household and the income is shared. And you are acknowledging, hopefully, that the partner working out of the home for pay is equally dependent on the partner who is either reducing their income for a period or eliminating their income for a period, because that partner who's working out of the home really depends on the flexibility of the parent who's making themselves available for the home. And I can say that my husband will tell you every day that he was not able to he built a tech company in those years, and during those years, he needed the security blanket that I provided to be able to get on a plane at any given time to go see a client, right? And so understanding that shared value, that shared contribution is huge in the financial preparation. And if your marriage is feeling a little rocky, not the time to fully pause. Maybe a time to consider another shift, but not the time to fully pause. I would also consider, if you have a child with special needs or a family relocation and your marriage is feeling a little rocky, which would, by the way, be fully normal. That sounds like a lot of stress. I would consider a postnuptial agreement, right? Like, if one of you has to pause. We enter contracts all the time in this country, but we don't seem to do it in our marriages to protect ourselves and our interests. And so we lay out a number of ways to prepare in that way. On a professional level, I think one of the things that we often, or at least I botched, was that when I was resigning, I gave 3 weeks notice. I was sweet and friendly, but left. Didn't, and this is your last employer is your most valuable bridge back to the workforce. Even if you don't intend to return, it's an incredible opportunity to nurture those relationships. And it can be coffee with the assistant. It can be coffee with the CEO. Anyone who you've touched and interacted with, you're almost networking on your way out. I try and encourage women to give as much notice as they possibly can, because it's an incredible way to leave on a good note. I think once you are getting your footing, which I will tell anyone, it is a transition period. Like, you've just left the workforce. You're not jumping into what is my new self-review going to look like? But I highly encourage women to not abandon professional goals. And those goals can look, I talk about goals, by the way, not just in a professional capacity, but professional, personal, and family goals. Goals dignify your time, meaning if you're away from the traditional workforce, oftentimes you hear women say like, oh, I feel stuck. I don't know what I want to do right now. I feel a little lost. Usually that's because there is no one telling you like, these are the benchmarks you have to hit by the end of the year. And so your time kind of feels like it's just happening to you. And a really simple way to come up with goals that are not like get this many new clients or this many new patients and that's a success when you don't have someone telling you to do that. You have this opportunity to dream a little bit about like, all right, what does it like, what would this looking back, what would make this time successful? And so I encourage women put pen to paper. There are a lot of different ways to do this. I like to write my ideal day in 5 years because if you're like really detailed about who you're spending time with, how you feel in your body, how you feel in your mind, what you're spending your time on, it starts to reveal like, oh, I see myself as a much more calm person. Or wow, I'm writing a lot more and I'm speaking about this topic. So then you can break it into these little measurable metrics for success for yourself. So it might be on a professional capacity. I want to be more of a thought leader on this topic. And I'm going to post 3 times a week on LinkedIn or once a week on LinkedIn. And on a personal level, I've always wanted to develop my communication skills. So maybe I'm going to listen to a podcast once a week, right? And so you can see how, based on the time you have available to you, you can break off small or bigger benchmarks to move yourself forward. And so then you're coming back, every 6 months or so and saying, oh, wow, I did that. Like, what else do I want to like explore or add to that arsenal? And that way you are intentionally moving yourself forward toward growth. And you can look back on this time and say like, oh, I did actually accomplish a lot of those sort of non-traditional skills and experiences.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like those are 2 major buckets, and I want to respond to both of them. I love that you use that term financial dignity because, whether we want to say it out loud or not, like when you are bringing in an income, sometimes in a marriage, you feel like that gives you a voice and a vote, And I think a lot of women forego that when they aren't bringing in a paycheck. They feel like, oh, well, I am not bringing in a paycheck, so I have to spend less on what I like, or which might be true, but like, or I just don't have as much of a voice in what we spend on, and I
Mm-hmm.
think, or maybe I let things slide that maybe I wouldn't, if I was bringing in a paycheck because now I'm dependent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is something that we really kind of need to look straight in the eye and address when we're considering taking a pause in our careers and talk about that very clearly with our partners. Because what I would hate to see is women getting into bad relationship situations because of the pause that they take if they haven't done it with the right person, or relied too heavily, or maybe they don't have that post-nuptial agreement if they are not on good footing, but their marriage requires a pause for some reason. So I just think that piece, I think the financial piece is like, it's the most like icky to talk about and think about, but it is so important for a woman to have a voice in her marriage, her life, and we don't want her to lose it if she's not bringing in that paycheck, So that's really all I wanted to say, and say that that's just, I think, so, so important. And then the other thing was, I think that a pause in your career doesn't, like a pause from leaving the house and going to work doesn't necessarily mean just like pausing your professionalism completely, right? Like there's this idea that like you quit your job and you are a stay-at-home mom and then you like kind of let that whole professional side of you go. Like those two things can coexist. And I think what you're saying is like you can do this for your own flexibility, for your family's flexibility. And I too, like I still, see patients and stuff, but like I do it in a way that makes sense for our family because my husband is gone 15 hours a day and like he's inflexible. Like you don't want him leaving his job if he's taking care of you, right? Because like the patients are really dependent on him. And, for a time, I will say that I did sometimes feel a little bit resentful. Like, am I the only person who cares to show up to my kids' parties, And then I realized, like, you know what? Like, my husband, I am his number one. I know that. But there are some times where somebody else's wife needs him more than I need him in that moment. There are times where someone else's father, son, needs him more in that very moment than I need him, and I'm strong enough and I'm capable to, like, handle these 2 kids that we've created together, and if I need him, I know he's gonna show up.
Mm.
And I think sometimes having that perspective is really important, especially if we are the spouse that is taking that pause. How do you handle that? How do you handle, like, those moments where you're feeling, like, overwhelmed?
Mm. I mean, like everyone, right? There were definitely, I would say, in the sort of first 5 years of marriage and parenthood, I would say they were really hard, right? I think you're learning, first of all, you're learning how to be married, but you're also learning how to be co-parents. And and I think that under the best of circumstances is challenging. I think when you have a partner who, mine was not an ICU doctor and still was on the road a lot. And I did feel like we were building it together. It was his, but I was his sounding board and I was his partner. And I also really believe in the long game. And I do think that helped, is knowing that it was going to, that at some point it would shift and we could rethink our roles and responsibilities. So that helped me personally. I do think my husband was the best advocate for, you do not need to do this 24/7 alone. And yeah, I think this is part of why the financial piece is so important, because I did have a partner who really valued and was very clear that he could not do the work that he did without my support at home. And when you think about it that way, then you can also think, well, how can our home be the most supported it can be? And so for us, I mean, another big part of this book is dismantling the trope that the work that you're doing in caregiving is of less value, but also worthy of less support. And I, for a long time, thought, well, if I don't work for a paycheck or I don't work for pay, then I shouldn't have paid support. And the thing is that, those were, if I look back, probably the most overwhelming years, right? The years I felt the least resourced. And during those years, I think what helped was I never really subscribed to the idea that if you're a stay-at-home mom, you have to be a super mom and do all the things. I was very clear that I had my priorities of what I really valued in parenthood, which was play and community. So a lot of my days were structured around arts in the morning and going to classes or going to the park in the afternoon and using naps and night times really for myself. Like I really planted the seeds for the power pause during that time. And I let go of the expectation that I was going to cook like elaborate meals. I let go of the expectation that I was going to keep the house tidy. That was something we did together, or we did after the kids went to sleep and did the bare minimum. But when we did invest in help, it was because of my husband's encouragement. And he, if you have the capacity to, and it was at first, it was like 15 hours of a babysitter, and that's what we have now. And then in between, there was like 4 days of a mother's helper. So we sort of shifted over and over again. But it was the idea that help helps the whole family. And he made the great point that when he walked in the house at the end of the day, he got the best version of me. The kids got the best version of me. The kids got the best version of him because he didn't have to like run straight into cooking and cleaning if we had this help. And so it wasn't just out of the mom's salary, quote unquote, it was out of the joint household income. And that day we created a line item in that budget that said childcare or home care, right? A cleaning person once a week. And so I think that the sort of two takeaways from that I hope women take is that if you don't have paid help, you should reduce the expectations, right? And I hope you do that anyways, because the reality is like you only have 17 hours in the day or 16 hours in the day. And that's not enough to make room for the kids and make room for all the different things in your social media feed. Like the person who's cooking, like doing crafts, is probably not cooking. And the person who's cooking is not doing crafts. Like everyone is letting go of something behind the scenes. And then I think no matter if you get like a part-time sitter, do a nanny share, do a house swap, like a babysitter swap with a friend, getting creative on childcare and also recognizing that childcare is a benefit to everyone was really crucial in reducing the overwhelm in our house.
I think we are sometimes the biggest barrier to getting
100%.
childcare, right? Probably like I feel like our husbands are the one that are like, "Oh, get a babysitter." And then we just feel guilty for some reason. Well, for a lot of reasons, right? To get childcare, especially when they're little. Like I remember I was a fellow when my daughter was born, and I would like not keep the nanny a second longer than when I walked in the door. And now I look back and I'm like, having an extra hour where the nanny was like doing I don't know, holding the baby so I could like go pee, that I'd been holding all day, or like, just simple things like that. Or I'd be like rushing home from the hospital to get the nanny out. And I look back and I'm like, gosh, I could have been easier and softer with myself.
I know. It's interesting you bring that up. I know we're both at that same juncture of 10 years into parenthood. And I think it took me 10 years to really think about guilt as really, of course, like a normal, natural cue sometimes, like something doesn't feel good, right? And then having to look at that thing and then make sort of a broader choice about like, well, what do I value, right? Because I think I can look back now and say, I value my kids feeling safe and loved and having a joyful home. And a babysitter doesn't take away from that. In fact, it probably helped, like, especially the years I had one, helped me be a better version. And so now I'm more likely to have, it's funny because I used to do the same thing. And now I have our after school sitter 4 afternoons a week. And I have her sit and stay for kids' dinner, even though she's not even doing, she just, because I recognize that she adds to their life. Right?
Yes.
She adds a different perspective. She adds interest. My daughter's like just gotten into songwriting because she's an actress, right? Or an aspiring actress. And so they, collaborate in that way. And I think we've been taught that like handing our kids over
Yes.
means that we are like selfish and bad, as opposed to like sharing our child with other people and helping them feel safe with other people is actually a gift. And it can add to our home. It can add to our family. And it's interesting, there is a lot of rewiring around help, but I feel it took me 10 years.
Yeah, same. Now I can recognize more, like we have an au pair now, and it's like, okay, now I get to share these wonderful kids with her and also be somebody. It's just not an exchange of services, right? When it's like your home, you're exchanging love and stories and just having multiple relationships. And I think having your kids feel comfortable, like you said, around other people. We were living in San Antonio and moved to Houston where my family is. And we've just seen the kids grow so much being around family and having other people as part of their day-to-day life that, it's important for us to expose our kids to other people's forms of caregiving too, and other perspectives and people and all of those things. So I think that new motherhood is so like, you just feel that immense responsibility and you feel like all of that responsibility is yours. And I'm certainly not trying to shirk the responsibility of motherhood. It is huge, but we can be softer with ourselves. I think that's probably, if I have to look back, I would say, like, that's the one thing I would change. I would have been
Me too.
softer with myself on a lot of the decisions that I made, or things that I tried to hold all by myself. So I hope people listening take this away and say, like, you can build a village. We all need a village, but you also have to be a villager. Like, you have to be willing to be vulnerable and let people in. You can't just say that you want to be the person that helps. You have to be willing to help, to have other people
Yeah.
willing to ask you for help.
Actually, on that, you know, one of the myths that I sort of rewrite in the book is this idea that your network dries up in motherhood, when I really believe that I expanded my network tenfold in motherhood, because there's this invisible thread that connects you to every woman with a child, right? And so suddenly it's low hanging fruit what to chat with a woman you see on a playground about. And what starts as, oh, like, I like your diaper bag, or what pediatrician do you go to, very quickly becomes like, what's your mother-in-law like? Or
Yeah.
what was your old work? What are you doing now? What are you thinking about? And suddenly these women can be sounding boards for you. They can be expanders. They can be thought partners. You can share ideas and examples of how to make work better, or how to advocate for yourself in your marriage. But one thing that I think I did, if I were to look back beyond the help, I would say I didn't want to be seen as messy. And I wanted to be seen as competent in parenthood. And so when things did get messy, and inevitably there will be a year things are messy, or many years, but for me, it was when I added my second child, and that transition to two knocked me off my feet. I had thought I had like a lock on how everything was going. And then suddenly, I wasn't sleeping again. I had a 2.5-year-old boy, which is a different level of parenting. And then he was, she was vomiting. And then I remember I had a really good group of parent friends, and I attempted to go to brunch with all of them. And it was so messy. I had a overproduction issue. So I was like squirting milk in some direction. The 2.5-year-old son was melting down. The daughter was like vomiting. I mean, and I probably shrunk back into myself over like the subsequent 6 months, because I didn't want to let people in. And that was ironically when I needed people the most. And the tie to how I showed up as a mother is that I think because I didn't know what I was going through is normal, and that it's very normal for 2.5-year-old and 3-year-old boys to be like going through mid swings, right? And it's very normal for there to be high stress with like a baby and a toddler. I felt ashamed. I felt embarrassed. I felt immensely anxious. And I think I took it out a little bit on, like, when I think about losing patience with my kids, I can still remember my son at 4. Like, that was the first time I felt like I lost my patience. And because I didn't have the normalizing steadiness and the firm affirmation from like a group of other mothers. And I didn't have help. And so, the link between that, I think, is real.
Yeah, oh my gosh, that transition from 1 to 2, when the little one's still, or the older one's still a baby, that was definitely the craziest time in my life. Like, you're breastfeeding one and potty training the other,
Oh my
like, oh
God.
my
Yeah.
gosh, that was crazy. But the thing is, yeah, if we don't lean in and talk about it, then we don't know that everyone else is going through the same thing, or has gone through it, or that it passes. I mean, I remember like the first time I went to the park when my littlest one was, I think, 3.5 or 4, almost 4, and I just was wearing like a little Lululemon fanny pack, and I was like, I have arrived. I have arrived. These kids can carry their own water bottles. But like that early stage where they're just running in different directions, and it's nuts. Okay, so, I think that this kind of ties into my next question. So, a lot of women in their 30s and 40s just like, and they become my patients, right? They feel like they are running on empty. And then there's all these like hormonal changes that start happening in your late 30s, and, health issues can start rearing their ugly heads, I guess, at that time. Have you noticed that in some of the women that you are talking to from your vantage point?
Yeah, I think it's no coincidence that the majority of women recalibrating their careers are around that age, right? That they've hit a certain level of energy depletion that is normal and natural in their body. It's now colliding with a reexamination of how they're spending that energy around work and family, and so you get to this moment of, well, how do I make it all work better, right? And I think we're a little bit grasping, but we're looking for like, okay, how can we have more energy? Should I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning? And if I drink hot water with lemon and I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and then I stand on a vibration plate and then will I feel better? And I think I think it's definitely the boom of the wellness industry probably collides with it, because in the end, what we're all trying to do is just make the most of this time, not in a bad way, but in a really beautiful way. And there's a lot available to do it. And I think it collides with a normal shift. Like our bodies, you know this better than ever, like our bodies turn over every a little bit less than a decade. And so it's very normal to be at this inflection point, right? And I'm newly 40 last year. And I think it brings up this reexamination of how do we want to move through this next decade of our life or next moment in our life. And I think all milestones do that. But when we really feel it with our health, I think it like triggers that moment of awakening. And I do think sometimes I wonder, like, is it a cue? Is it a very biological cue that we have to shift something, that we are not young again? We can't like labor the exact same way. Our work and time need to be spent a different way. And I think there's just happens to be a lot more stressors right now in parenthood, especially. And I think, and in the workforce. So it's just making it all a particularly intense generational issue.
Yeah. Okay, so when's your birthday? I turned 40 last year too.
August 7th.
Okay, mine's July 13th.
Well, it was so fun. I loved turning 40. I really did.
Yeah, I feel like it's like 30s was great too, but I feel like this is a decade of like more confidence, right? Like you know yourself better. I know different people have their kids at different times, but my kids are a little bit older, self-sufficient a bit, and just like so fun. This age is so fun. And so it really feels like a time to just like, these are the days, right? These are those days. These are the good old days that we're going to look back on. It feels like that at least. So, I love being in my 40s too, although maybe some of the hormonal changes I could do without, but I know how to fix that.
you of all people know how to fix that. I do think it's interesting. I should call out, since we're on this podcast and it is about health, that when we asked American women on pause in the survey, what are your how do you evaluate success? They put a clean house tied with their mental and physical health. And that was in 2023. I wonder if we poll again. I think there's been a lot of change in the last 3 years in the health and wellness industry. And I was shocked. And it's, they were given top 5. So to be fair, there was like their marriage, their children's health, so there were, but yeah, it was only 4% said their mental health, which was tied with a clean home.
Wow, that's so interesting.
And I call that out because I remember looking at it thinking, how can we raise healthy and well children if we are not healthy and well? Right.
Yeah.
And I think the way that manifests, and I have been guilty of this, which is why when you said you have so many women who come into the office, I was thinking like, good on them for making time because I didn't go to the doctor for a really long time.
Yeah, and I think we want to raise well-adjusted children who know how to cope with situations that maybe were kind of brushed aside when we were growing up, or if they're feeling anxious, give them coping strategies when they're young so that they don't go through their entire teenage and early adulthood being anxious. And I tell my kids all the time that, you know what, mommy messes up all the time. It's okay. It's okay. We just learn from it, right? And I think that sometimes when we try to model like perfection all the time instead of helping our kids, it can actually hurt them. The same thing with like, I'm sure you've heard of the anxious generation. Um, it talks a lot about how giving the children chores or things that they're responsible for actually gives them confidence to do things later. If we don't make them responsible for things around their own home, then they won't know how to do anything when they get out the door, and they won't have the confidence to troubleshoot and all of those things. Same thing with like letting them get hurt on the playground. If we don't let them do that, the first time they get hurt, it's going to be a whole lot worse and they won't know how to cope or their boundaries. So I think now we're in that phase where our children can become helpful little people, which I feel like mine are getting to be little cute, little helpful people. But there's this other book called Real Self-Care. Have you heard of it?
By Pooja Lakshman. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great book. So if you're listening to this podcast, we'll put that in our show notes. It is such a great book with a lot of perspective on kind of this similar thing, like how do we actually take care of our mental health and make it a priority. And it's not, I think the subtitle is like, it's not all bubble baths or something like that.
Bubble baths, crystals, and something else. I can't remember. But I think it was really, I think that's where overlap in all of our work, which is like getting intentional about like, what do we really need to feel whole and healthy, right? And how do we actually, I think the biggest thing for us is like making physical time, because it can't happen unimagined time, right? So for me, like my non-negotiables is like waking up and doing a 5-minute meditation and a 10-minute intention setting. And also like only like I don't aim to work out every day. I only want to work out 3 times a week, right? Not everything has to happen every single day. And I think reducing the pressure on how it looks, right? So that 5-minute meditation and 5-minute, bullet journals in my phone doesn't look very impressive. It does not look like a meditation like cushion in like a beautiful window. It's like in my bed lying down, like, my husband and I have negotiated. He takes the kids out, starts breakfast so I can do that. And then the 3 times a week that I exercise, I do 1 with a friends, which helps like check the community bucket and like does 2 in 1. And then 2 times with a strength trainer, but they're committed hours on my schedule. And I think that that's a really important piece of this is it doesn't just happen. You do have to actually decide like this is important and it has to go on the calendar.
Yeah, and just like living intentionally without just going through the motions too. And then the last thing that I kind of wanted to talk about was, okay, so we've talked a lot about the pause, but there's a lot of like stigma around re-entry. So when we think about re-entry, like there's this resume gap, there's this confidence hit, am I ready? How would you say that, okay, now you've taken this gap and now you're ready to do something, right? Because you have done this, right? Like you have done a lot of career stuff, either while you were on that pause or kind of, after you'd paused for a little while. How do you think that people could re-enter with some confidence?
Well, I think there's a few pieces. One, we talked a little bit about mom friends. I want to call out that mom friends are women's best ally in returning to the workforce. Often when women talk about how they re-entered, it was through the help of the women that they met over the last season of their life, because often those are the women who have witnessed your character, witnessed your capacity, because maybe you were volunteering in the school or in the local community in a way that they were able to see firsthand. Those are often the women that you've had coffees with and maybe asked about what they do, and they have offered a connection. So don't sleep on the mom friends as your bridge back. I think that in this sort of in between, I would say when women are returning, we found in our survey that they rank above all things flexibility, meaning less stress before salary. So I want to just call out that many women, when they return to the workforce, it often looks like a pivot because they're often just use their time away from the workforce to redesign what work looks like for them. So you see a huge boom this year in entrepreneurship. We have women making up the greatest number of entrepreneurs that we've ever seen in this country. We see the gig economy exploding with fractional and freelance talent. So I think that those two pathways is one of the most significant ways women re-enter at this moment, and mostly because they've decided they no longer need to be on pause doesn't mean their kids don't need them anymore, so they still want flexibility, right? And the current traditional workforce doesn't always accommodate that. And then I would say, when you're considering transitioning back, I would plan for at least a year. Oftentimes I think women think we're going to return and it's going to be like, I'm going to maybe 3 months or 6 months. As soon as you start to feel that nudge of like, I'm thinking about a path back, I would start with like, I'm not returning right away. I'm going to do an exploration period. Ideally, you start this on day one of your pause, but I know that's not realistic. One way to do this is what I call serious self-study. By that, I mean you are literally opening an iPhone note or a Google Doc and you are writing down any task or project or time you helped a friend or time you helped your partner on a business thing, or even a piece of content that you lingered on and ruminated on a little bit. You're writing it down in a Google Doc, because in about a year or even 6 months, it'll do two things. One, you'll start to see like, oh, I seem to lean into a lot of project management things. And wow, the content I'm consuming has a lot to do with like family policy. You can start to fine tune what it is you're interested in, but also where your skills are. And I always use this example of a woman down in North Carolina who was doing this Google Doc. And when she was getting ready to transition back, she realized that the bullet that popped out to her the most was a time that she reorganized her kids' bus route. And when she did that, she realized, like they just weren't being picked up efficiently. So I called the school board and I figured out the buses. She did that in the ordinary backdrop of caregiving, right? But when she was looking at it in the bullet, it said it like reoriented her toward project management. And then when she put career sabbatical for family life on her, or career pause for family life on her resume, her first bullet was implemented highly technical infrastructure change for local organization, which was that bus route, right? So you're taking these seemingly ordinary experiences and you're starting to connect the dots a little bit for yourself. And so I want women to recognize that what they're presenting is a career portfolio. Owning that career pause with like clarity is important, but I think the sub bullets under it, you have a lot of leniency. Even if it was an unpaid volunteer assignment where you led a fundraising committee, amazing. That gives you an opportunity to have real skills you can speak to. I think as you go through that exploration, if you start to see, you know what, I was in SEO marketing and AI has changed a lot. I need to take like a course on it. There are so many certifications. We run a membership specifically for women on career pauses to be able to take workshops on their own time. And the goal is that you get to keep growing in small ways, but those are ways you can start to fill in. And I hate to call it the gap, but the space between feeling confident on that interview and where you are now, right? And then the last thing I would say is there's this amazing sub-ecosystem I'm seeing in the economy, which is women who are building their own businesses and then hiring other women and other mothers in small freelance positions or opportunities. That's where the mom friends come into play, right? Someone starting an interior design company and needs someone to build their website or do the copy or advise them on social media. Like, take that opportunity. It might not pay the most, but those are the ways in which you start to bridge yourself back to the workforce.
Yeah. And, my company is a microcosm of that too.
Me
Like all
too.
of my employees are women who are moms, and like now some of them are out earning what they were doing in the traditional space, or probably all of them are, And so I think that taking some of those risks, it doesn't like going back into the workplace doesn't just have to be signing a contract with a big company with all the benefits. It can look different, and taking what you learn from that pause, and what you got from it, right? That whether it was a flexibility or time with your children or time to reflect or whatever it is, and making sure to not just jump into something that makes you leave all of that behind is so important. And I actually think that women who are mothers are like made to be entrepreneurs, like are made to be CEOs. Like we are organization wizards, right? Like organizing your kids and your family's schedules and doing all of the things that it takes to run a household and a family. That is hard. It's hard. And managing difficult personalities, we do that every single day. Putting out fires, like there's a lot of skills of motherhood that translate very well to a professional career. And this podcast is mostly professional women, people who have had commitment to their education and their career at some point. So, that commitment translates to a lot of different spheres, and a lot of us sort of think about the work that we do for free as not real work, but it does teach us and guide us for the next things. Like, I don't think I would have ever started my own business I wouldn't have started my own business if I wasn't a mom.
Yeah.
And I would not nearly have been as good at it, like having to organize everything and, organizing my team, like a lot of that takes from motherhood.
Yeah.
So I hope people leave this episode feeling like, okay, motherhood is a valuable place to lean into, whether or not we decide that we're going to do work outside of the home or work from home that gets a paycheck, whatever it is. So what do you want women, especially like the high achievers, the ones who would never let themselves pause? What do you want them to take away from your book?
I want them to make sure they talk to the stay-at-home moms in the pickup line, right? Like, I think so often we've seen this false divide between the working mom and the stay-at-home mom, and I want them to realize that, wait a second, we're actually more alike than we're different. One of the most compelling pieces from the research was that 1 in 3 women working out of the home are going to pause in the next 2 years. 1 in 2 are planning a downshift of their working hours to something in between. And 90% of the women on pause are aiming to return to the workforce, which really then makes you think, wow, we could all be helping each other so much, right? Like the women who are mostly in motherhood right now can be supporting the women who are more of a career sprint by like picking up their kids or offering a hand on like reminders for the millions of emails that are coming through on any given day. And then the women who are in the workforce can loop friends into opportunities, make connections for them on something they might have been doing previously, be soundboards, offer coffees, allow and dismantle the divides that have been between us for so long.
Yeah, I think we are so much better when we collaborate than if we remain divided. And I absolutely agree. We find so much more commonality when we actually try to bridge those divides. And like, I have made work connections through people in completely different fields, through moms who aren't working outside of their homes, come up with opportunities for my kids from every type of different mom. I think the mom network and brain trust is really something powerful. And as long as we lean into it, we can really do amazing things as women together. Well, I loved this conversation. This was so fun, and you're just so brilliant, and I'm grateful for everything that you've done. Where can our listeners find you?
You can find me at Neha Ruch on Instagram. You can follow me on LinkedIn under the same name. There are a ton of free resources, from navigating financial conversations with your partner to negotiating flex work, on thepowerpause.com. And we also have a private membership for women who are in that in-between period and do want to stay connected and creative in shaping their next chapter.
Awesome. Well, we'll link all of your website and your Instagram down below, and we'll put in a link to your book, because I loved it. I really did read every single word, and I think all of you should as well. And as always, you can find me at Dr. Arti Thangudu on Instagram, and if you want to come see us as a patient, it's just sacomplete.com. Thanks so much for listening.